start by thanking Creative Mornings for inviting me to talk, and the folks here at Vladem who do all the setup and run this amazing space. I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and Bob and Ellen and other donors for contributing so generously and being such a big part of giving us a place to be today. I'd also like to acknowledge all of my fellow team members at DNCA and Studio GP. I wish you could hear their perspectives too sometime, because I think we probably all have different perspectives. I will talk mostly about the process of making a building, but first we'll start with a few words about my background and inspiration. I was born in the American Midwest and grew up in Saskatchewan. My home city of Saskatoon is on the same line of longitude as Santa Fe. It is located on rolling prairie in wheat farming country. Like New Mexico, Saskatchewan's population is sparse. The largest city is about 300,000 people, and the next closest one is a 3-hour drive away. After that, it's another 6 hours to the next. The Wisconsin glacial stage was the last of several such periods that affected most of Canada and much of the upper Midwest. Oh, can we have the lights off? In southern Saskatchewan, it scraped away the original geology, replaced it with rich soil, and left gigantic river valleys and lake beds behind in its retreat 10,000 years ago. Driving across the prairies and looking out the car window, you will view a simple, timeless, abstract landscape of vastness and horizon. But if you pull over to the side of the road, get out of the car, and look down at the ground next to your feet, you will find all of the detail in the world. I'm inspired by both the horizon and the details. I went to architecture school in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The school's focus is very attuned to the local landscape. As students, we immerse ourselves for years on end in the poetry, abstraction, and phenomena offered by the prairies. And if you've ever been to Winnipeg in the winter, that's a phenomenon in itself. And I did 8 years of it. I was later drawn to the Southwest by a landscape that is ancient, with geology that is hundreds of millions of years old right at the surface. I wanted to experience a landscape that is formed by wind and water erosion. I've come to love spending time in the mountains, where the forces of entropy can be visibly witnessed if one does the same hike on a weekly basis. It really happens that quickly. My mother, Kaija Sanoma Harris, grew up in Finland and was a textile artist. Her primary inspirations were the landscape and its natural phenomena, and her work addressed both the vastness and the detail within the prairie. Each piece appears simple when you stand back, but when you get up close, you will find a different story, told through layers of color, complicated technique, and different types of fiber, all carefully and quietly orchestrated for visual effect. She actually made this. She taught me the importance of craft. She believed that details mattered, and she taught me to aim for perfection. When I would do a sewing or a knitting project under her guidance, I learned to pull things apart and redo them as many times as it took to get them right. Perseverance is Finland's national character, and the lesson served me well. This piece is one of my favorites. It's called Stubble Field, and it's from 1984. And I think you can get a little bit of a sense of what I was talking about relative to the sort of like the whole and the detail. And this area up here, that's mostly silk thread, which reflects the light in a whole different way than wool does. And that was fully intentional. She was fascinated by how the light hit grass and tried to replicate that. I arrived in New Mexico in 2001 and started working at DNCA. You know, and I'll leave you. Oh, I can't leave you. Yes, I can. I think I can. Okay, maybe not. In 2004, just 2 years after Devendra Narayan Contractor founded the firm. The first built project that we worked on was the Sears building renovation at the opposite end of the rail yard on Guadalupe. Both the studio and our roster of projects is kept small so that we can provide personal attention to everything that we do. There are currently 4 of us, which is a good size. one of my colleagues, Rebecca, is right next to the exit hatch there. Let's see, we are large enough to have a range of aptitudes, but we are small enough so that everybody can be aware of what is going on with projects. Devendra runs the firm and directs design, and I oversee production. There are a couple of things that are unconventional about how we function. First, Devendra is actually in the trenches doing production with the rest of us. He doesn't just direct and walk away. The rest of us are also involved in design. Second, all four of us are licensed architects, which is not at all typical for most firms. It means that everyone can work independently for long stretches of time without oversight, and that we have the knowledge base and experience to complete relatively large and complicated projects with an unconventionally small team. So, we all encountered the concept of parallel back in grade school. Parallel lines are equidistant. In possibly the most bittersweet of geometric concepts, parallel lines keep company, traveling side by side to infinity, but they never meet. The obvious and most rational sister concept to parallel is that of perpendicular. Together, parallel and perpendicular are the principles we use to define, organize, and communicate about our world. They are how we mark terrain and divide open land. They are how we establish equal access to resources. They are how we organize our cities and shape our buildings. The earliest known use of the grid in city planning occurred in the Indus Valley almost 5,000 years ago. Parallel lines are part of civilization's legacy. They are how we transport goods and people, and they provide the most economical and logical basis for making construction materials. The NCA has had several core principles since the beginning. I doubt that our methods of working are unique, but they are consistent to our studio culture. We believe in an honest expression of materials. Where possible, we prefer to expose structural materials and allow them to provide the finish and character of the space. You will see examples of this principle throughout this building, like these walls around you. We respect the craftsman. We admit that we are not experts in every subtrade, and it is not our role to be. We guide intent, but allow room for those who are experts in putting the materials together to contribute their expertise towards making the expression of the materials as honest as possible. We do our best to foster open communication and work side by side with the builder and owner to solve problems as they arise in the field. Communication is one of the biggest parts of our job. There was never any question that the existing brick warehouse building on this site would remain and be part of the new museum. Our earliest conversations were about the fact that the number of functions that needed to fit into the project would require an addition to be made to the existing building. Doing an addition in a way that respects an original building, both in massing and in character, is always a challenge. We felt strongly that the best way to respect the original building was for the addition to be of its own time and have its own structure. These images are part of the conversation that we had about how old and new would meet. The gesture that you see here is partly about bridging and partly about protection. This slide shows the original building, the Ilfeld warehouse, right there, in the early 1940s when it was less than 10 years old. The tracks that you see are the Chile line, a narrow gauge railroad that had been in place already for 60 years before the Ilfeld was built. The Chile line was closed shortly after this photo was taken. Here it is in plan view. So, there you go. And you can see that the primary mass of the building, the existing building, was aligned with the railroad tracks. And there was a loading dock on this side of the building that we rebuilt during construction because we had to get insulation up against the basement wall because that's where the collections are stored, and it's humidified and we didn't want the dew point to be in the middle of basement walls and cause future problems. When the tracks went away, the building retained a skewed relationship with Guadalupe and Montezuma, which opened up the corners of the site for public gathering. Here's that model again. And that was me. I did the Vanna White while Devendra talked about what was going on. The initial design for many, if not most, projects arises following numerous rounds of iteration and study. This slide shows the concept model for the Vladem that was generated very early on in the project. It was the only concept model that we actually ended up needing. New bridges over old. Both new and old are essentially boxes, but each has its own proportions and material expression. This solution just seemed to pop out of Devendra's head one day. And I'll be honest, I was not initially very supportive. I wasn't the best team player. Although I loved the simplicity, I allowed my doubt about Santa Fe's ability to accept something this modern to get in the way. And I'm sure that those of you who live here can understand why. It was Devendra's vision and belief that carried us forward. The path wasn't easy, but our client had belief too and supported us, and everything worked out. It's extremely rare in architecture that the final building matches the initial concept diagram this closely. It's never happened for us before, and I don't know if it ever will again. It's sort of a magic moment. A diagram that is this clear is like the Rosetta Stone. It establishes organizing principles for the project and all future decisions. This slide shows how the relationship between the existing and new structures allows for terraces and gathering spaces to be opened up at the corners of the site for people to linger in. I figured I'm not going to show you too many pictures of the building because you're in the building and it's not a good use of your time or mine. But this is a view you probably can't have. It's a drone view from the northeast, and you can obviously, you're all familiar with the entry plaza there on the northeast corner. And this view from the southeast corner allows you to imagine the Chili Line tracks running past the original loading dock on the east face of the building and up Guadalupe to cross the river. We wanted the addition to be legible from the interior of the warehouse. This right here. The belly of the structure above carries ducts, plumbing, and fire protection piping down the center of the building. So it's not just an object, it's doing a job. We took the opportunity to use the new structure as a device to bounce natural light into the heart of what had been a dark warehouse for over 80 years. So you'll see the light slots that are in the lobby. We had to fight for those at one point. Somebody wanted to value engineer them, but we managed to keep them. The design of the metal scrim at the north and south ends of the addition provides a case study of our team's working process from design through construction. We initially wanted to use an expanded perforated mesh that comes from Spain. It has a textile-like quality and casts beautiful shadows. The further we got into design, the more vague both the technical and pricing information seemed to get, which was scary. With seemingly ever-changing dimensions and costs, it was impossible to engineer the support structure precisely. We knew that our budget was tight, and then we had to find another source. The best North American alternative that we located came from Mexico, but they couldn't make the size of panels that we wanted, so we decided to move on. One of the conversations that we had as a team was about how we all felt uncomfortable with importing an overseas product for a special feature on a building that is about New Mexico art and that is for the people of New Mexico. We wanted a locally fabricated solution. As we were sitting around the table talking about it, Devendra struck again. He picked up a piece of paper, tore it in half and folded it, and said, "Why don't we just do this?" So we did. And the thing is, I don't know about like those of you who design on a daily basis. most often when somebody says, like an idea is prefaced by, why don't we just? It's usually the obvious solution. And from that point on, the problem pretty much solved itself. This slide shows a couple of iterations of mock-up on the left side that our team made in order to test the form and attachments for the scrim prior to completing the construction drawings. The blue version, oops, oh shoot. All right, well, anyway, the blue version was a full-scale mock-up that the subcontractor did at their warehouse. They were trying to pitch us on, instead, the taller panels are in the bottom row, and they wanted to make it out of 2 sets of panels, but we said no. So every now and then we have to say no. The image that was on the right was a sandbag test specified by our structural engineers to simulate wind loading conditions. All told, about 20 people from us through to the installers were involved in designing, fabricating, and installing just the aluminum scrim. So this brings me to people. Parallel is a great metaphor for the processes that go into realizing a building. When we won the RFP for the project in 2017, the Department of Cultural Affairs, the Museum Foundation, and museum staff had already been working for years to identify the project site, determine the needs of the facility, begin fundraising, and then undertake the process that brought us to the table. DNCA teamed up with Graham Hogan of Studio GP to enter the RFP. At times throughout the project, our architecture team was as large as 8, but there were usually 3 of us working close to full-time for 5 years. Our team of engineers and landscape architects was another 15 to 20 people. The development of the project from the owner and user side involved building committee members, museum staff, the Museum Foundation and its board and board of trustees, and a team from DCA. That amounted to another 50 or so people. Each of these groups had their own areas of focus and made their own contributions to the project. Then there were all of the city and state staff involved in the historic reviews and the construction permit process. This probably amounted to another 15 individuals. And of course, the building would not have come to life at all if it weren't for the belief and tremendous generosity of benefactors. Before construction even began, the project involved at least 120 people. As architects, we are just part of a larger creative process. While one of our roles is to provide the overall vision for a project, our larger role is to work between all of the other forces and individuals involved to guide the vision through. Small and large acts of creativity and problem solving happen throughout any project and contribute to success. Here's an example. The general contractor for this building was Bradbury Stam. With over 100 years of experience, they are among the most seasoned builders in New Mexico, and they are a New Mexico company. They are master problem solvers. This project began construction in early 2020, and Bradbury's management team quickly foresaw the supply chain problems that were approaching as COVID advanced. They bought and stockpiled materials well in advance of when they normally would have done so. This greatly reduced the impact of shortages on the project. What you see here is typical of any job site. When you go to do a site visit, you see evidence everywhere of technical conversations and problem solving. This is just the next stage on from the construction drawings that we do. Our documents describe the end result, but it is the contractor's legal role to define the means of getting there. Everyone involved contributes skill and intellect to their role. There are hidden conversations in the walls all around you in this building. It takes a lot of individuals to construct a building. The construction team for this one probably involved at least 200 people. What's funny is that when I asked Bradbury's project manager and site superintendent one day how many discrete individuals would have been on the site and contributed to the project over 2.5 years of construction, they initially could not answer me. They had the most blank looks on their faces, like, why would you ask me that? These were 2 seasoned individuals who have both been in the field for decades, and they had no clue. That's because they don't think in those terms. They log all the workers who come onto the site for clerical and insurance reasons, but they don't add it up. It's just not a number that comes out in the bottom line. So embodied energy is a term that you will hear in relation to buildings in our era. It refers to the materials and fuel required to make the components that go into a building. The thing that is not quantified when we talk about embodied energy is the qualitative value of human energy and skill involved. The reuse of an existing structure does not just honor the materials and fuel spent in making the building, but it is an acknowledgement of embodied human effort. Human hands made and laid every brick in the original 1930s warehouse. They formed and poured the concrete for foundation and basement. They fabricated, erected, and riveted the steel. They framed the floor and roof. They carefully topped the structure with a brick parapet coping, and they prepped and applied the stucco. The people involved have been gone a long time, but their energy remains here. I find it humbling to think that all of the efforts, labor, and brain power expended by so many individuals in the course of bringing a single building into being are done so in service to something that begins as just an idea, and that it all ends in a place for people to gather and enjoy their lives. It gives me hope. What inspires me most is witnessing firsthand daily evidence that humans can work together to accomplish good things, and I'm grateful to be part of it all.